trying to wrestle with the supply and demand equation. There's a lot of capabilities, right? Data, analytics, web page authoring, on and on and on. The demand for these capabilities and these skill sets will always be greater than the supply.
Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Room for Growth. This is a special episode. It is the first episode of our third season. So thank you for joining us on this journey. I am solo today. Billy Fisher is at a conference in New York City. So you are stuck with just me, but luckily we have a fabulous guest. Chris O'Brien is a senior product manager at M&T Bank. He owns basically the entire tech stack for M&T end to end. M&T Bank, if you haven't heard of them, they are a legacy pillar of the financial institution. They are especially great at building trust. They have been in the news semi-recently when there was a lot of fallout from where investment dollars were going in Silicon Valley. M&T Bank was sort of seen as this pillar of trust and this brand that you could really trust in a time of flight and risk. So I think it's really interesting to talk to Chris about how he operates as a MarTech strategist and as a leader in this space. How does he make decisions about where to put investment and where to make bets about where the industry is going and what customer needs will be in the future versus what he spends, a limited budget on today. He's going to talk a lot about how M&T Bank isn't the biggest player in the game. They don't have a budget that's unlimited. He has to make choice. And within that, it's really interesting to think about how he aligns his MarTech strategy and the platforms that he invests in, the work that he does, the development that happens with the business goals and the changing landscape for consumers. So a really interesting conversation. I think there's a lot that can be pulled for all different kinds of marketing leaders. And I'm excited to talk to him. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. Hey, everybody. We are in luck today. We are going to have a deep dive conversation on the state of MarTech, particularly in financial services, which is just an industry ready for some transformation, for some big booms. So today we have Chris O'Brien. He's a senior vice president of product management at M&T Bank, a MarTech leader who has experience in both leading digital transformations and getting tech stacks to work together hypothetically, especially in industries that tend to be very challenging for technology and challenging from a volume perspective as well. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise. So, Chris, to start off, tell us just a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What role are you in? What is your day job?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I have worked at M&T now a little over 7 years, actually almost might be 8 years, and have really been working to mature our tech stack to support the evolution of our customers and the evolution of the business strategy. And at this point, my current role is what we call a senior product owner of our marketing and customer experience art. And that's all a lot of words. But an art is an agile release train. And really what that is it's a team of team structure. So we have a series of agile oriented teams, and I sit within the business and am the liaison, if you will, to our technology partners. So we have a number of different agile teams that work against those objectives in support of a really diverse array of stakeholders. So we have internal users who are hands-on many of our platforms. And then we also have lots of external users who come to use our products and interface with us on things like mtb.com and wilmingtontrust.com. So it's a lot of fun. We get to work across the enterprise and really support the growth of the organization through the strategic application of people, process, data, and technology.
Awesome. So MarTech can encompass so many things. It can be messaging, it can be data orchestration, data management, measurement, of course. It encompasses potentially a wide range of platforms and operations. Get a little bit more specific. What are you owning and overseeing at M&T Bank today?
Yeah, great question. I have a lot of different partners that help support us from a lot of different perspectives, right? So I always like to talk about it as all of this is a team sport, right? There's a lot of different people working to support our customers and support the business across platforms. Typically, I've been really focused on activation So how can we connect with our customers on our own channels, but then also in the broader digital ecosystem, right? Our customers don't exist only in the branch or only on our website or mobile banking or online banking, but also in a much broader digital ecosystem, right? Across things like the walled gardens, viewing publications. And so we want to be able to build an ecosystem so that we can interact with those people across the channels where they interact. So really a broad swath of capabilities. You might say sort of marketing technology, ad technology, sales enablement, and a little bit of customer experience operations. So there's quite a handful of applications and vendor relationships that underlie all that we do. And again, it's a team sport. There's a lot of people working on it from a lot of different perspectives, right? I don't want to act like this is me alone. Certainly, it is a team sport, and that's how we look at it.
Talk to us a little bit about some of the trends that you're seeing both in MarTech as well as how marketing practitioners are using tools to drive business outcomes. I know that one thing in particular that we've seen in financial services is that it tends to be that those who are managing the technology for marketing are pretty far removed from the day to day practitioners in the past. That's created challenges bringing sort of user experiences to life. But also just like the platforms themselves, what's available for fintech companies, not just fintech companies, but large financial services companies, fairly limited because you just have a whole set of sort of infosec requirements you have to be accountable to. So, what kinds of trends are you seeing today? What are some of the biggest shifts happening?
Yeah, I love that question. Thanks for that. I think one of the things that we focus on a lot to try to get around one of those challenges that you just called out is really focus on end users, not just as right customers or prospects, but also our stakeholders and our end users within marketing, right? And we take that experience very seriously. So we even are working on, I'll call it a way to measure customer experience of the users of our platforms, right? Sort of a pseudo NPS, if you will. And one of the trends I think that's really important for marketing departments, but probably for the business broadly, is thinking about capabilities and trying to wrestle with the supply and demand equation. There's a lot of capabilities, right? Data, analytics, web page authoring, on and on and on. The demand for these capabilities and these skill sets will always be greater than the supply, right? It's really difficult to recruit some of this top talent. And, obviously there's budget pressure and headcount pressure, right? So trying to do, you always hear this articulated as we're asking to people are asking us to do more with less, right? And so that leads us to the trend of being able to look at these not as just right the tech and data. I think that's one of the challenges is if you're removed from the business, removed from the marketers, and you're just focused on the tech and data, you're not as focused on the people and process. And so it's really important to say, okay, how can we solve this across all of the levers that are available to us, and then work to solve those across those different levers. And one of the things that I think is an important trend, and I believe that we've done well with and are continuing to do well, is thinking about that in a way that we would want to democratize capabilities, right? So if there is a bottleneck on, say, web page authoring, how can we build a system and a platform that'll enable more people to build right web pages, right? So if the business says, hey, we want right these web pages, and there is a bottleneck on like your traditional website team, well, let's solve for that bottleneck, right? And really enable more people to do that. And so that's, I think, a trend that is important and increasingly important. And one of the other technology trends that everyone has been talking about, obviously, this is a super hot topic, is generative AI and its application within marketing, whether it's for creating copy or for creating visual content. I think the democratization of AI along with the democratization of MarTech. And you've seen this with no code platforms, right? That's going to continue to really skyrocket. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to kind of match those trends and really be able to to answer that supply and demand equation and truly do more with less. Like I really do think that we're in an era where we can do a lot more with a lot less if we can enable the right capabilities in the right way. I mean, to your point, right, we have to do all of that, which isn't trivial, inside of a pretty strict risk management framework.
That's such an interesting concept. I mean, we hear about this a lot, the trade offs between centralized tech, where you have good control mechanisms, you can have better consistency. There's probably more strategy going into both the platforms that are being leveraged as well as the content being created or the web pages being built or the
Right.
messages being sent,
Right.
right? That it's easier when everything is centralized to have that sense of quality control. But democratization comes speed and agility and innovation and experimentation and all of these things that are also really important. Where do you think is the right balance between those two concepts, especially in financial services, where as M&T Bank, you're known as a really trustworthy organization? That's a hard place to be in the industry. It's such an important reputation to keep. And democratization, under its worst terms, could threaten that because of quality breaches in terms of just like end content, for example. Where do you think that intersection is? What's the right balance between control versus agility?
And it changes every day, right? I think that we have to continually wrestle with that. Where we're assessing, right? We're assessing risk in a lot of different ways, and I think you touched on a couple of them, right? Reputational risk is a huge one, in addition to all the other risk management that happens. And so I like to think that we should focus on establishing principles and then making sure that we build those principles within the system, whether that's building it into the culture of the organization or it's building it into something that's systematic within the actual tech and within the data, and just making sure that we have those proper checks and balances to enable the organization to have that right level of agility, but also be able to manage and govern risk. And I think we're never going to be we're a pretty conservative organization, right? And I think we're never going to be as agile as a 3-person startup where you can test and try new things, and you're really not as concerned about reputational risk. So certainly there's a level of agility that we'll never achieve, and that is too far. But we can have aspirations to be able to be more agile within the risk management framework that the bank has. So I think that's really how I try to think about it, is constantly wrestling with that and making sure that we're being really, really good stewards of the organization, enabling the teams to have that feeling within the culture. I think that's super important, right? People are just so important to all this. And then also just thinking about, right, like how can we still be innovated within that framework? And that's what we try to do is really just continually balance that and challenge ourselves. But at the same time, right, have our customers in mind. I think that's super important, all of this, right? Yeah, so it's not an easy issue, but it's certainly not one that's going away.
Yeah. Going back to your comment about AI and the opportunities that exist to leverage AI for content or for production of different type of imagery for marketing messaging, if I were to assess the state of the state, I'd say that in general, marketers are in like a test and learn phase right now, where there might be some use cases that make sense for AI. We're not totally sure what the end experience will be and whether it will drive business outcomes or how it helps efficiency. Like we're not quite measuring the impact yet. But I'm curious if you can add some specificity to the use cases that you see where AI could be really beneficial and drive business outcomes. What do you think is most exciting about, particularly some of the content generation that's possible?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of different use cases, right? Both to drive growth as well as improve operational efficiency. So we're, really excited about that, right? And it's not the technology for technology's sake, right? It's finding the right applications to be able to drive the business outcomes. and business outcomes for us, right? There's a lot, but ultimately most of them boil down to growth or operational efficiency. And so um, finding tools and technology that can help us with that is always going to be important. I would say that marketers in financial services within the big players, so sort of a larger than M&T Bank, are well outside of the test and learn phase. They're to pretty full operationalization of some of these things. And so for us, I think it's a little bit of playing catch up, to be candid. We're not going to have those technology budgets that the Chases have. I think I saw one time that the amount that Chase spends on technology every day is our whole annual tech budget. So just orders of magnitude different. But with some of the new technology, there is the ability for smaller organizations to get leverage out of these types of things. And so for me, it's really about, right, what are the business outcomes? What are the use cases? And then map the solution to that and not start with the solution, right? I think that is really important for people to focus on, especially when we're in these hype cycles, right? And I think a good example of that was, right, like how hyped up Web3 got, how hyped up the metaverse got. And while there's definitely still applications and probably pretty incredible businesses that can get built, that train is kind of left, and now we're on this new hype cycle. So it's really making sure that we're still, right, we're focusing on the business, we're focusing on the customers, and letting that lead us rather than letting the hype cycle and the tech lead us. In terms of specificity, I think it goes to what you mentioned in terms of agility and experimentation. I think we've done a really good job about enabling a culture of experimentation. M&T, even before I got here, always had a pretty strong, we call it test and learn mindset. And that was really something that we've embedded within marketing. And so I just see these technologies as helping us to continue to do that, right? How can we just speed up the experimentation, enable more people to experiment in more ways? I think a really good example of how we might use these is using things to help us to craft copy, but then also be able to test that copy at scale across different segments of our customers. That's a really great application of some of these technologies. And I think there's a lot of results that show the promise of continuing to invest in that type of stuff.
Yeah, those are really great points. I would love to spend an hour digging in on where you think some of the biggest players in the space are creating such a competitive advantage by their adoption of these tools. But I will keep us moving because
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I see, and I'm a nerd about this stuff, so I definitely have more financial relationships than the average person, just because I want to see what's out there, right? And some of the larger national banks, they clearly have this figured out, right? So they have a curriculum of things that they want to talk to you about, right? There are a series of things that, based upon your relationship with them, right, which is really just data, right, based upon the data that they have about you, they know the things that they want to talk to you about. And they limit those things so that they're not overwhelming you with messages, but then they're also, right, reading your behavior and tailoring that based upon your behavior. So really building out those that understanding of their customers, and then allowing intent signals to adjust how they're interacting with you. And that's always happened in financial services, face to face, right? You go into a branch, and someone, right, knows the information about you within their CRM, and based upon your behavior, your intent signals of what you're telling that person in the branch or how you're behaving, right, they tailor their message to you. And it's really not entirely different. It's just in a different channel, and perhaps with a lot more data than we had in the past. And so I kind of look at it like that, where we know that we have this relationship with this person, and we want to show them that we know them, right? We understand them, and we communicate as such. And so I think that's really what it's all about, is being able to build that curricula and speak with your customers about that in a way that makes sense, right? It's relevant. And that's what some of the big players are doing really, really well is developing that and being able to coordinate and orchestrate that across channels. I'm impressed by some of the stuff that people are doing.
Interesting. Yeah, I think of like hearing you talk about how these tools are being leveraged. You're also relying on principles of marketing that we've had since the dawn of CRM. So you're talking about sort of like RFM principles of like recency, frequency, monetary value, what's the next best offer based on those principles. But I guess what you're saying is take the same best practices, the same structure that we've always had for making rules and logic about what you offer people or trying to focus them on a particular action, but put data at scale. And now we have a way to actually manage that and optimize toward it and do it at a one-to-one level, and then add content specificity on top of that and then be testing that content. Sometimes questions about scale of operations really overwhelm my brain, because it's easy when you get into this robot world to not be able to like see beyond human function, right? Like it's beyond human control. I'm just curious how you think about what's the right level of scale? What should be the north star of personalization? How tightly should we be trying to achieve like one to one versus continuing to think more traditional segmentation? Like we have a group of 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people who all kind of need the same thing, and that's worth our time and effort versus how close can we get to the one to one knowing we might miss the mark entirely? Like I'm just curious to hear one more 5 more minutes of your thoughts on what's possible in terms of scale and personalization in financial services.
Yeah, I think it goes back to those principles, right? And I've been in and around marketing or sales, for a long time. And the one thing that always holds true is that we really need to understand our customers, right? And so marketing to me is the part of the organization that understands our customers the best, right? And we should hold on to that. And how we do that has changed, but it still stays the same. And to your point about customer segmentation or audiences, that is all still relevant, but you can get to one really quickly, right, through behavioral data because everyone's behaviors are different. So let's say that you want to engage a specific audience or a specific segment with certain products. And so you create, right, products and you create digital services for that segment, right? And then how do you layer that into someone's experience with your brand based upon their behavior, based upon those intent signals that they give you? And that really quickly gets you to one to one. So I don't think it's, again, like one to one for one to one sake, but it's about how can you use principles like knowing your customer and really supporting your customer to get you to that experience. And certainly we're not perfect at this, but the way I think about personalization is, in order to not be creepy, you need to be useful. And if you're useful and you're creating that fair value exchange, then you're generally going to see good outcomes, right? I think it's when brands they focus too much on the business results at the expense of the customers that you see those bad experiences, right? So as we're thinking about personalization and really how to apply it at scale, principles are really important. And most customers are not going to complain, right, if you're supporting them toward better outcomes and you're really giving that value exchange in a way that it's a win for them, right? Making these communications useful and relevant. And certainly we have work to do there, right? Like we're not perfect, but I think that those are the things that can help guide us.
Yeah, I love the idea that was thematic in what you just said about if you're not sure how to be using AI today, use it to understand your customers. Don't use it to increase volume to them. Use it to understand what their needs are, their friction points in a really granular way as the best place to at least increase the strategy of what you're trying to do. So, Chris, you have done what I think of as one of the hardest things in MarTech, which is around consolidation. We are seeing a ton of consolidation in the banking industry as a whole. but you've also had to go through tech consolidation as part of your role. Can you talk just a little bit about what M&T's strategy is for integrating MarTech solutions with legacy systems and through acquisitions? And what are the best practices? What are the tenets and principles that you lean on to keep M&T Bank moving forward in terms of its technological capabilities while also respecting the fact that change is really hard?
Mhm. Yeah, that's another really good question, and I think it's just a balance, right? So as a bank, certainly we're financially driven, so our pencils are pretty sharp and our calculators are nearby. So we're pretty focused on right making sure that we're delivering value for the investments that we make, and certainly rationalizing tech is a part of that. And so it's really about balancing that investment with the outcomes, and also being able to kind of keep up and support the business strategy so that the business isn't waiting on us, and that's really difficult. But many, and this was something that I've had firsthand experience with here as well as at other organizations where right business strategies pivot, the objectives from senior leadership change, and that's not going away. In fact, it's going to happen more quickly, right? Like it used to be that perhaps the world changed every year, or maybe um, certainly slower than it does now, right? It seems like the world changes every day now. And so it's really important for us to be able to build that fungibility, or maybe that's not the right word, but let's say like the extensibility and flexibility within the system so that we can pivot, right? And I think a lot of businesses saw the need to do that, including us, right, during the pandemic, right? Basically, overnight, things changed. People didn't come into the branches anymore, right? They really couldn't come into the branches anymore. And so there are so many examples of that, right? Where customer behavior changes, and so the business strategy needs to change, and so we want to be able to build that flexibility within the system so we can pivot and react as quick as possible, right? When the priorities shift. And one of the things I think about to be successful at marketing technology is being really focused and aligned on like what is the vision and what is the business strategy, and then how do we deliver against that. And so it's having the focus on the business and in a way that you're designing the system to be able to react to the business. And then certainly like at a more granular level, I guess you could say, right? We have relationships with lots of different vendors, right? With marketing clouds, with best in class endpoint solutions, and I think those are really important, right? Is getting the balance of your partnerships and your vendor relationships right, and then making sure that you're going deep where it makes sense for your business, and rethinking some of the decisions that were made in the past, right? Like certainly there's lots of legacy technology that we have to interoperate with, but it's how do you build something that is flexible to operate with legacy technology, but also moves forward, right? And I think one of the hot topics in the past, which really hasn't gone away, but people don't talk a ton about as much, is cloud, right? And how much modern cloud technology has allowed us to do things in a different way than we could in the past. And certainly, cloud is huge in marketing technology. So I think that's a big tailwind for marketing technology teams is just being able to adopt and leverage cloud. It helps in so many ways.
Yeah, that was one of the first things that I thought of when you were talking about investing in sort of good bets that you won't regret as the business moves forward. One in financial services, of course, being the transition from on prem servers to cloud and just how challenging that has been to make sure data stays extremely safe as it could possibly be when it's stored in servers that are locked up on site somewhere. That's a big one. But I'm curious if you can go a step further into how you think about this. Like we hear so many marketing and business leaders talk about the importance of having a flexible tech stack, flexible to change, flexible to a changing ecosystem and to business goals. But how are you really doing that? What are some of the takeaways that other MarTech leaders could learn from M&T Bank on how to even think about this challenge the right way?
Yeah, it's a hard one. But going back to what you said, I like the concept of making good bets. I think that's good. And there's a concept that I kind of touched on earlier about being able to build the system and build the tech and data ahead of the strategy, that it's sort of related, sort of not, called architectural runway. And I talk about that a lot, right? Is like, how can we really understand the current business strategy, but also understand user behavior, how the world is tending to change, and then create runway ahead of it by, right, making those good bets. Um, and that's not easy, but ultimately, I think that is one of the things that can help folks in terms of, right, specific things that MarTech leaders can do. It is, I think, leaning into some of those more forward thinking, like technologies, right? Like cloud is a big one. I know another hot topic now that is really, really important is focusing on identity. Banks and financial services have had a really, really strong focus on understanding their customers and have a wealth of first party data, right? Which is one of the things that is is really great. I should say, advantageous over, say, the publishing industry, where they didn't really necessarily have that first party data relationship, right? We do know a lot about our customers, and so it's really about, how do we leverage that along with some of these new identities, especially as cookies become less and less valuable within the digital marketing ecosystem, right? And so mapping the strategies from the old technology, right, third party cookies, into the new technology, if you will, and that's like cloud based identities, and then be able to interact with people across channels in context. I think that's a big one, and one that I think we're doing some things that are as you so eloquently said, good bets.
Yeah, I think a lot about, I like the concept of architectural runway and what that means. And it brings me back to something that a guest of ours, Nate Wooten, who leads all of our product strategy for Willow Tree, harkens on, which is just the idea that when new experiences are launched for the first time, they delight users, but eventually they just become an ubiquitous expectation. So, one of those would be, for instance, the touch screen of an iPhone. When that first came out, it was such a delight feature. It was so cool and new and fun. And now it's just an expectation. The nice thing, at least about financial services and some of these like larger industries, is you have the benefit of seeing more emerging technology create front end experiences that just become the expected experience for consumers, and being able to determine like which of these experiences will consumers expect us as a bank to also adopt for them. So that's a nice lagging indicator of how to make change. But I'm curious what leading indicators you have to look at and you have to be considerate of that are unique to financial services in particular.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think those things are important, right? In terms of like experiences through digital leaders that create the new expectations for users. And one of the things I think that benefits us is that can become a leading indicator, and that we don't need to be on the cutting edge of adopting all of those things because it's not expected of us. And certainly, right, back to the point I made earlier about the difference in magnitude of tech spend between someone of our size versus, one of the larger national banks, is that we're never going to be able to keep up with that, right? Like, so if we're going to play that feature functionality game of who has the hottest new financial management feature, like we're never going to be able to keep up with that. But that we don't need to. It's about, right, providing the right functionality and experience for our customers, right? And a lot of it is just like, it's the basics, right? It's giving people what they need when they need it, regardless of what channel is most convenient for them at the time. So it doesn't necessarily, in my mind, have to be fancy. I think the hard thing that there is to try to create the ability to switch contexts quickly as customers switch contexts. I think that's one of the behavior changes that is a little bit difficult. It's easy for a digital native brand to really be able to do that across a few channels. Let's just think of like a e-commerce brand, right? Where their primary channels are the website or mobile app, perhaps email, and then maybe a phone number, right? So three channels, and so orchestrating and coordinating experiences across those in context, while not trivial, is a lot easier than doing that across the number of channels that we have, right? Especially when we also have in branch experiences as well as for B2B. Relationships, folks have a relationship manager, who they interact with. So, sometimes customers are interacting with us on let's say a dozen channels, and you have those legacy technologies that you're also having to interact with, and so that becomes, I think, the real challenge is like getting the basics right across all of those different touch points, and that's how you're going to really stand out to provide a really strong customer experience and keep people, coming back to your brand. Is not those whiz bang feature functionality, but using right customer behavior as the leading indicator, and just doing what I think um, strong financial institutions have always done is knowing their customers and supporting those customers with the products and services that they need to um, live an abundant life.
You talk a lot about staying close to your customers, really understanding who they are, what their needs are. How do you incorporate customer feedback and insights into your MarTech strategy and decision making? I think all brands want to be very customer obsessed, but many struggle to actually keep data moving into their systems and into their decision making in a meaningful way. How are y'all tackling this?
That's a great question. And I think you can do it a lot of different ways. And I would say I don't focus as much on a lot of end user experiences. A lot of what we're doing is building infrastructure. And so it's a little different than if you were to talk to, right, a team that was doing something with a mobile app or online banking. Ours is definitely different, and so we definitely want to talk to customers, right? If nothing else, go out and literally talk to your customers, right? I think that can't be overstated. And then there's other ways to do that, right? Using online tools. I'm a big fan of doing user research, whether you're getting quantitative data from a site analytics tool or you're getting qualitative data from a UX research type tool. I think all of those can be really, really helpful. And then we also have a pretty robust voice of customer and voice of employee programs. And those are also incredibly helpful because when we think about our customers, right, it's not just those external customers or actual M&T customers. Our employees are also customers. And whether that's the marketers who are using some of these platforms and improving their experience, or it's someone on the front lines, right, in a branch, in a call center, making sure that we're measuring their sentiment and experience and pulling in that feedback to improve the systems that they use. I think um, that we take that pretty seriously, and I think do a pretty good job. And there's a lot of things out there. A lot of the same technologies that brands use to measure customer experience and sentiment from their customers. You can use those same tools and techniques within the organization as well.
We are building prototypes right now where we're actually trying to use existing AI tools to consolidate feedback that comes through other platforms about things like app reviews or non-structured feedback that might come from like an in-store survey or some kind of written review format. Or it's part of the problem with that is there's just so many that it's hard to actually theme that feedback and understand it in a meaningful way. So we're working on prototypes to take that feedback, consolidate it in a tool like ChatGPT, and then understand it back out as something that's more shareable. So back to your point about, just the opportunities that exist with AI to simply understand the customer better, to take on massive amounts of data that for any human brain would be just too much to understand in a way that can point to an insight or a direction or a what to do. It will be really interesting to see how we can better understand the customer through that lens.
And I think it's a great application, right? It's already being baked into some of the systems that you're using. They're layering in those technologies to do things like data mining and BI, and then putting on chat layers to be able to query that analysis in a chat, right? Rather than using um, SQL or another type of technical language. So that's already happening, right? And you're seeing all these businesses that are really starting where they're taking something that already exists, but they're just combining that with like ChatGPT. I think a good example of this evolution over maybe the last 5 years, an example that I use a lot is Zapier and ChatGPT. So Zapier is essentially like an integration hub technology. They brought no code to something that previously required technical skills, and then you layer that with that sort of chat interface, and then it enables someone who's not non-technical but semi-technical without code to do some pretty amazing things. And I think that's what you're going to see within a lot of these platforms is those are just going to get embedded, and so it's just going to make um, people that have the proclivity and the um, I guess the ability to learn new things, to do things that were very technical only 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's a super great point. I mean, I think especially like software developers are already thinking about how much of their job can be outsourced to something like a chat GPT, and then what replaces that time? Like what can we put brain power against? Maybe I'm an optimist because I think as soon as you take away a basic function that somebody shouldn't even be spending brain power on because it's so tedious, then what do you replace that time spent doing? And can it be really positive? Can it be beneficial? Can it be innovative? Can it push the needle on the experiences that we know how to build today because we're just limited by time,
Mm-hmm.
limited by brain power.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you have a bit of optimism in this space too, where right now there's feels like there's optimists and pessimists, and it sounds like we're both on the optimism side.
I was gonna say I'm generally an optimist. I don't know about this. I'm if we were to have a conversation specifically about AI and modern technology and the implications on humans, I'm not optimistic. So it's a little bit different. But in terms of what you're saying specifically for the future of work, I am. I think it allows people to do higher value work. I already see the benefit to productivity of myself. I outside of work, just in my personal life, trying to utilize and learn these new technologies and how and where to use them. It's incredible what you can do, right? Like something that might have taken, let's say you wanted to do some kind of strategy research and create a deck for a senior leader, and that might have taken 2 weeks in the past. You can do that in an hour. Um, it's wild. And so I think that about the I'm optimistic about the ability for white collar workers who adopt these technologies to succeed, but there's other things that I'm not as optimistic about. But ultimately, I think it's not super helpful to be pessimistic. And certainly, like nowadays, you see so many people that um, are really pessimistic about a lot of different things to the point where you just have apathy, and that's probably not a helpful way to live either.
Love to see you out here living as a technology moderate.
Yeah.
Chris, one more question for you. This podcast at its core is really about how brands can build experiences that are so good they drive true brand loyalty. So I'm always curious which brands our guests are actually loyal to. Who do you love and why?
That's a great question. Um, I have a lot, but I would say one is Nikon, the camera company. And I've been a Nikon guy for a really long time for a bunch of different reasons. But ultimately, they make a really, really solid product. So that would be one. Um, Another is Specialized Bicycles. I'm a little bit biased because I work there, but ultimately, I think that the products are just super solid, and that's a really good example of where you're going there. Is like those are premium products that cost more than the competitors generally, but you still go and go for that brand because it's a better product in so many senses. And so those are two that I reference, but certainly there's others out there. And honestly, I probably should think more about it. I haven't really thought about that in a long time.
Well, Chris, thank you for being on today. It was really great to hear your perspective. Would love to have you back in a year when we have a better sense of how AI has truly shifted business, because I think you are right. It's going to cause change at a rapid pace, and anyone who can keep up with that pacing is likely to see some wins. So, we'll be curious to check in with you again in the future. Otherwise, thank you so much for being on Room for Growth. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. I hope everybody has a great rest of their week.
Thank you. It's fun.